What really happened to gospel legend Rance Allen in his final days? For years, whispers, rumors, and quiet speculation have surrounded his passing. A moment that left the gospel world in disbelief and the fans who loved him searching for answers. Officially, the world was told that Rance Allen, the father of contemporary gospel, passed away peacefully at the age of 71. But behind that simple statement lay a far more emotional and complicated truth, one that his family kept hidden for years. Now, at long last, those closest to him have begun to speak out, revealing what really took place behind closed hospital doors, the private words he shared before his final breath, and the message he left for those who would carry his legacy forward. And what they revealed changes everything we thought we knew. Because this isn't just a story about loss, it's a story about faith, legacy, and divine peace. From hidden hospital moments to unspoken goodbyes, the truth about Rance Allen's final hours shows the man behind the voice, not the legend on stage, but the believer who spent his last breath in worship. So today, we're diving deep into the revelations that Rance Allen's family finally shared. The emotional, the spiritual, and the truly extraordinary story of how one of gospel's greatest voices finished his race. And as you'll soon discover, the truth behind Rance Allen's final moments is far more powerful than anyone imagined. Before we uncover the mysteries of Rance Allen's final days, we need to remember who he truly was, not just as a singer, but as a movement. Because to understand the man, you have to understand the mission that shaped his entire life. Born in Monroe, Michigan in 1948, Rance Allen wasn't just gifted, he was chosen. From the moment he could speak, he could sing. His mother often said that his first words weren't spoken, they were sung. By the age of 5, Rance was already performing in church. His small frame barely able to reach the microphone, but his voice, deep, soulful, and overflowing with the Spirit, could fill an entire sanctuary. By the late 1960s, Rance and his brothers Tom and Steve formed the Rance Allen Group, a trio that didn't just make music, they made history. Their sound broke every rule of traditional gospel. They blended church harmonies with the rhythms of soul, R&B, and even funk, creating something that had never been heard before. It was bold, modern, and unapologetically spiritual. To some church traditionalists, it was too different. But to millions of believers, it was exactly what the world needed. Rance Allen's voice became the bridge between generations, a sound that spoke to the streets and the sanctuaries. He could take a hymn and make it feel like a prayer set to fire. Hits like I Belong to You, Just My Salvation, and the timeless something about the name Jesus turned him into a legend, not because they topped charts, but because they touched hearts. That soaring falsetto, that signature growl, those improvisations that seemed to come straight from heaven, they weren't just techniques, they were testimonies. Kirk Franklin once called him the voice that broke the wall between tradition and innovation. Donnie McClurkin said, Rance didn't sing notes, he sang truth. And yet, even with all the awards, the fame, and the decades of sold-out performances, Rance never chased celebrity. He often reminded fans, it's not about the stage, it's about the message. He was a bishop, a teacher, and a man who saw every performance as an altar call. No matter where he went, from packed arenas to small-town churches, he sang with the same power, because he believed every soul in the audience mattered. But behind that energy, behind the laughter, and the voice that seemed to defy time itself, there were quieter moments when the cameras stopped and the man behind the music began to carry a different kind of weight, one that few people knew about. Because while the world saw the performer, his family saw the man. The husband, the believer, the one who prayed long after the lights went down. And as Rance entered his 70s, that private side began to tell a different story, one filled with quiet struggles, health challenges, and unspoken faith that carried him through his final years. But what no one expected was just how close he had been walking with heaven all along. And what happened next would reveal the truth about the battle he fought behind the spotlight. For years, fans believed Rance Allen was unstoppable. His voice remained strong, his smile was bright, and his stage presence carried the same fire that had defined his career for decades. But behind that unwavering spirit, subtle signs began to appear. Quiet changes that only those closest to him truly noticed. It started small. He would take longer pauses between songs. His movements became slower, more deliberate. Sometimes, during interviews, there was a brief look of fatigue before that familiar smile returned. To the public, it was easy to chalk it up to age. After all, he was in his 70s, still performing, still preaching, still giving his all. But to his family, it was different. According to those who loved him most, Rance had been managing several health challenges for years. He rarely spoke about them publicly, preferring to keep his personal struggles away from the spotlight. He didn't want sympathy, one relative shared later. He always said, "God's got me. Don't you worry." Friends and fellow artists often said Rance was the kind of man who would sing through pain, smile through fatigue, and encourage others even when he was the one in need of encouragement. He saw ministry not as a performance, but as a calling, one that didn't pause for sickness or weakness. His wife, Rance Allen, became his anchor. Married for nearly 5 decades, she was the one who saw what the audience didn't: the nights when exhaustion hit harder, the mornings when he needed help getting ready for a performance, the gentle reminders to rest when his heart said go. She would tell him, "Baby, you can't pour from an empty cup." But Rance, as always, felt the world still needed his song. Even as doctors reportedly advised him to slow down and focus on recovery, Rance couldn't bring himself to step away from the pulpit or the stage. His faith wouldn't allow it. "If I can still breathe, I can still praise," he told one friend during what would later be remembered as one of his final interviews. Then came 2020, a year that tested everyone's faith. As the pandemic swept across the world and churches closed their doors, Rance turned his home into his sanctuary. Through live streams, virtual concerts, and online devotionals, he kept singing hope into the darkness. Fans noticed that he looked thinner, softer spoken, but his spirit still radiated light. Yet behind the screens, the truth was harder. Those close to him say that his health had begun to decline more rapidly that year. He reportedly faced complications that affected his strength and stamina. There were whispers, not from tabloids but from insiders, that Rance had been quietly dealing with heart-related issues. Still, he never allowed illness to define him. He believed the Lord would take care of him, a family friend said. Even when he wasn't feeling well, he was praying for others. That's just who he was. But as the weeks went on, even Rance's unshakable faith couldn't mask the toll that his body was taking. He began limiting appearances. Performances were canceled quietly, and those who saw him in his final months described a man who seemed to be at peace, as if he knew something no one else did. It was as if he was preparing, not for an ending, but for a transition. Because in those final weeks, according to his family, something began to shift in his spirit. Rance wasn't focused on healing anymore. He was focused on finishing well. He started reaching out to old friends, calling people he hadn't spoken to in years, offering encouragement, prayers, and words that, in hindsight, sounded like goodbyes. No one realized it at the time, but Rance Allen wasn't saying farewell to the world. He was saying see you soon, and when October arrived, that quiet strength would be tested one final time. Because what happened next inside that hospital room would forever redefine how his family remembered him. By the time October 2020 arrived, Rance Allen's body had grown tired, but his spirit was more alive than ever. Those closest to him say he carried an unusual calmness during those final weeks, as if he already knew that his journey on Earth was nearing its final chapter. According to reports from family members and close friends, Rance had undergone a routine medical procedure just days before his passing. It wasn't considered risky, but soon after, complications began to emerge. Doctors did everything they could, but the recovery didn't go as planned. Even then, Rance wasn't afraid. Nurses later described him as the calmest patient in the ward, a man who spoke softly about heaven, peace, and seeing his Creator soon. His wife, Ellen, stayed by his side through it all. Because of pandemic restrictions, hospital visits were limited, but Ellen refused to leave his side for long. When she couldn't be there physically, she stayed connected through phone calls, video chats, and prayer chains that stretched across the country. Those who spoke to him in those last days recalled that Rance's focus had shifted from getting better to preparing for eternity. He spent more time praying than talking, more time reflecting than worrying. One nurse reportedly overheard him humming something about the name Jesus quietly to himself while hooked up to monitors, a song that had carried his name around the world, now serving as his personal hymn of surrender. Family members who managed to connect with him by phone described their final conversations as different. His brothers, Steve and Tom, who had sung with him for over 5 decades, said he sounded peaceful, not weak but fulfilled. He kept thanking us, Steve later shared. He said, "We did it. We sang for the Lord, and we did it right." Ellen later revealed that Rance would often wake up in the middle of the night just to pray. Sometimes he'd reach for her hand and whisper, "Heaven's getting closer." At first, she brushed it off as the words of a tired man. But as the days passed, those words began to feel prophetic. In one emotional moment that Ellen described to close friends, Rance reportedly looked up from his hospital bed and said softly, "I can see the light." His eyes were open, but his focus was somewhere else, upward, as if he was seeing something no one else in the room could. He looked peaceful, Ellen recalled. He wasn't scared. He wasn't in pain. He was just ready. Despite the family's efforts to keep his condition private, word began to spread through the gospel community that Rance had been hospitalized. Concerned fans flooded social media with prayers and messages of love. Many didn't know just how serious things had become. To the outside world, Rance Allen had always been larger than life, a voice that could never be silenced. But in that hospital room, surrounded by quiet machines and prayerful whispers, the man who had spent his life lifting others was finally being lifted himself, this time by faith. According to family accounts, Rance's final hours were filled with music, prayer, and peace. Ellen played soft gospel instrumentals beside his bed, and at one point, she said, he began to hum along. His voice was faint but steady, a worshiper praising even as he approached the threshold of heaven. As dawn broke on October 31st, 2020, Rance's breathing slowed. Ellen held his hand and whispered prayers, refusing to let go. His eyes opened one last time, and in that moment, she heard him whisper a single word: "Glory." Then, silence. It wasn't a cry of pain, nor a gasp of fear. It was a declaration. A final act of worship from a man who had spent his life doing exactly that. Later, the nurses told Ellen they had never seen a passing so peaceful. There was a glow on his face, one said. It was like he wasn't gone, just transformed. And while the public announcement that followed would be brief, those who were there knew there was far more to the story. Because behind that official statement, Bishop Rance Allen passed away peacefully, was a moment that his family called divine, a moment that wasn't about loss at all, but about a man being called home. But in the days that followed, as the world learned of his passing, silence from the family only deepened the mystery. Fans wanted answers and rumors began to swirl. Why did the family stay quiet? What were they protecting? And what truth were they not ready to share? Until now, when the news broke that Bishop Rance Allen had passed away, the gospel world was stunned, not just by the loss itself, but by how little was said about it. The statement released by the Church of God in Christ was short, respectful, and almost cryptic. It mentioned that Rance had passed peacefully and asked for privacy, but it didn't include a cause, a timeline, or any mention of his final moments. For fans who had followed his every move, the silence was deafening. How could a man so public, so open about his faith and his calling, leave the world with so many unanswered questions? Almost immediately, speculation began to spread online. Some claimed he had suffered from a sudden illness. Others whispered that there were complications surrounding a medical procedure. A few even suggested something darker: hidden causes, withheld reports, or a family cover-up. Social media filled with theories, many of them emotional and unverified. But through it all, the Allen family said nothing. Weeks went by, then months. While tributes poured in from around the world, from Kirk Franklin to Donnie McClurkin, from Yolanda Adams to Marvin Winans, the family stayed silent. They didn't correct the rumors. They didn't address the questions. They simply grieved in private. It wasn't coldness. It was conviction. According to family friends who later spoke out, Rance had made one final request before his passing. "When I go, don't make it about how I died. Make it about how I lived." That single line guided every decision they made in the aftermath. Ellen, his wife of 49 years, refused interviews. His brothers declined TV appearances. Even close collaborators like Kirk Franklin said they would wait until the family was ready to speak. "They're honoring his wishes," Franklin said in an Instagram post. Rance didn't want drama. He wanted peace. Still, for the public, the silence only fueled curiosity. YouTube channels began dissecting the timeline. Bloggers questioned the hospital account. Fans wondered whether his health struggles had been hidden or if something unexpected had gone wrong. But for the family, silence wasn't secrecy, it was sacredness. Rance's wife Ellen later explained that those first few months were spent in quiet reflection, prayer, and healing. "People wanted details," she said, "but I wanted to protect what was holy." His final days weren't for the world, they were for us, and for God. It wasn't until years later that Ellen and Rance's brothers decided the time had finally come to tell the full story. Not to satisfy curiosity, but to bring closure. When they spoke, they didn't reveal scandal. They revealed spirit. They shared what really happened in those final moments: the calmness, the peace, the whispered word glory. They explained that his passing was due to complications from a long-managed heart condition, not mystery or malpractice. And most importantly, they revealed that Rance's final wish was for his life to be remembered as a testimony, not a tragedy. In one interview, Ellen's voice trembled as she said, "He didn't want the world to cry for him. He wanted them to praise." The family's truth silenced the rumors, not with anger, but with grace. And what they shared next would move even the most skeptical fans to tears. Because when Ellen opened up about Rance's final message, the words he left behind for the people he loved, the meaning of his silence became clear. It wasn't that they were hiding pain. It was that they were protecting purpose. And when that message finally came to light, it would reveal the most beautiful truth of all: that Rance Allen never really left. He just went home. When the Allen family finally decided to speak, they did so with one goal: to bring peace, not publicity. Ellen, joined by Rance's brothers Steve and Tom, revealed that Rance's passing had been the peaceful fulfillment of his faith, not the tragedy so many imagined. They confirmed that he had battled a heart condition for years, quietly managing it without complaint. The medical procedure he underwent days before his passing was meant to help, but complications arose. Still, they said, there was no fear, no panic, only prayer. "He was singing up to his last breath," Steve said tearfully. Even the nurses were moved. They could feel the presence of God in that room. Ellen described one unforgettable moment. Just before he passed, Rance whispered the word glory, his eyes fixed upward, a faint smile on his face. "There was a glow on him," she said softly. "It was like he wasn't leaving. He was ascending." That, Ellen explained, was why the family stayed silent for so long. He didn't want sorrow. He wanted celebration. He said, "Don't tell them how I died. Tell them how I lived." After his homegoing, strange coincidences began to unfold. Sunlight breaking through clouds during his favorite song. Messages of healing from fans who'd never met him. To the family, they weren't coincidences at all. They were signs that Rance was still ministering, even from beyond. Today, Rance Allen's legacy burns brighter than ever. His voice continues to echo across generations, reminding believers that faith doesn't end with life. It begins where fear ends. He left no mystery, no scandal, only a message. If you hear my songs, remember, I made it home. And maybe that's the real truth behind his final days. Rance Allen didn't pass away. He simply went from singing about heaven to singing in it.